The fork clattered against the linoleum floor, and 7-year-old Emma Hayes froze with her hand still outstretched, her face flushing the color of August tomatoes. Every conversation in Sally's diner stopped. Just stopped. Like someone had yanked the needle off a record player. The only sound left was the hiss of the griddle and the tick of the Coca-Cola clock on the wall. 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon in August 1981. This moment would change everything Daniel Hayes thought he knew about kindness and cruelty. Before we go any further, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from, and what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below, and if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Daniel reached across the red vinyl booth and squeezed Emma's hand. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said quietly, but his weathered face told a different story. At 34, Daniel looked a decade older. His skin sun-darkened and creased from 16-hour days under the Texas sky. His hands calloused from work that never seemed to end. He wore his only good shirt, a faded blue button-down with a frayed collar, pressed as neat as he could manage without an iron. His son Luke, barely 5, sat wedged between them, clutching a toy tractor Daniel had carved from scrap wood. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease, with an undercurrent of pine sol and something sweeter, maybe the peach pie cooling on the counter. The vinyl booth felt sticky against Daniel's jeans, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that peculiar greenish glow that made everyone look slightly ill. Outside, the Texas heat shimmered off Main Street, turning the pavement into liquid silver. Daniel had promised the kids a treat. One meal out. Just one. After 2 years of scraping by since their mother died, after the worst drought Brazos County had seen since the 1950s, he'd counted out the coins in the old coffee can above the refrigerator and decided they deserved something normal. Something that felt like hope. Emma slid from the booth to retrieve the fork, her hand-me-down dress, pale yellow with small flowers, originally her mother's when she was a girl, brushing the floor. Daniel saw the hole in her left sock. He'd meant to buy new ones. The list of things he'd meant to do stretched longer each day. "Leave it." The voice cut through the diner like a blade. Sally Brennan stood behind the counter, her arms crossed over her chest, her platinum hair teased into a helmet that hadn't moved since 1975. She was 50-something, maybe 60, with sharp features that might have been pretty once before bitterness had carved permanent lines around her mouth. She wore too much turquoise eyeshadow and a pink polyester uniform that crackled with static when she moved. "Ma'am?" Daniel looked up, confused. "I said leave it. I don't need your grubby charity case kids crawling on my clean floors." Sally's voice carried to every corner of the diner. At the counter, 3 ranchers and Stetsons suddenly found their coffee very interesting. In the back booth, a young couple abruptly studied their menus. Nobody looked at the Hayes family. Nobody moved to help. Daniel felt the heat rise in his chest. Not anger, but shame. The kind that burns. "We're paying customers," he said evenly, though his jaw tightened. "We haven't done anything wrong." Sally laughed, a harsh sound like gravel in a metal bucket. "Paying customers? Daniel, everyone in this town knows you're one bad season from losing everything. Hell, you're probably here spending your last $5 on hamburgers you can't afford while your farm turns to dust." She leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "I remember when your daddy ran that place. He had pride, standards. Now look at you, bringing your kids in here looking like something the cat dragged in." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Luke buried his face against Daniel's side. The shame transformed into something else, something colder. "My children are clean and respectful," Daniel said quietly, "and we have every right to be here. Not in my establishment." Sally straightened, triumphant. "I reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. And I'm refusing you." What would you do in that moment? Would you fight? Would you leave? Would you shield your children from the cruelty? Or would you stand your ground? Daniel reached into his pocket and placed a $5 bill on the table. Crisp, probably the last one he had. "For the water and the trouble," he said. He took Emma's hand and lifted Luke into his arms. His son's toy tractor clunked against his chest. As they walked toward the door, the silence felt suffocating. 37 people in that diner, and not one of them spoke up. Not one. Daniel's hand touched the door handle when a voice, gravelly, old, certain, cut through the room. "That man saved my life." Daniel turned. In the corner booth, half hidden by shadow, sat a man Daniel hadn't noticed when they'd entered. He was elderly, maybe 70, with silver hair swept back from a lined face and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore an expensive suit, charcoal gray, completely out of place in Sally's diner. A gold watch caught the light as he stood, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd earned every year on his face. "Excuse me?" Sally's voice cracked slightly. The old man stepped forward, and Daniel felt something stir in his memory, something just out of reach. "3 years ago," the man said, his eyes locked on Daniel. "You pulled my daughter and granddaughter from a flooded truck on Route 12 during that storm. Do you remember?" The diner held its breath. Daniel's world tilted sideways. The flood. He remembered the water, brown and furious, swallowing the road. He remembered a woman screaming from inside a truck, a child's face pressed against the back window. He'd tied a rope around his waist and waded in. He'd never learned their names, had driven away before anyone could thank him. "That was you," Daniel whispered. The old man smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "That was me. My name is Walter Pritchard." He paused, letting the name settle. "And I think it's time everyone in this town learned who Daniel Hayes really is." Walter Pritchard's words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to unhear. Daniel's act of heroism 3 years ago wasn't just noble. It was about to expose how wrong an entire town had been about the man they'd dismissed as broken. Sally's face shifted through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, skepticism, then something harder to read. Fear, maybe, or calculation. "Walter, I don't know what you think you're doing." "I'm doing what should have been done a long time ago," Walter said, his voice carrying the weight of money and authority. He turned to address the diner, and people who'd been pretending not to listen suddenly had no choice but to pay attention. June 7th, 1978. The storm that flooded Route 12 and killed 6 people. Do any of you remember? Heads nodded slowly. Of course they remembered. It had been the worst flash flood in county history. Walls of water that came out of nowhere, turning roads into rivers in minutes. My daughter Rebecca was driving from Houston with my granddaughter Sophie. Walter's voice remained steady, but Daniel caught the tremor underneath. Sophie was 3 years old. Their truck stalled in the water, and the current started pulling them downstream. Rebecca called me on one of those new car phones, screaming that they were going to die. I was 2 hours away. The fire department was dealing with a dozen other emergencies. Nobody was coming. Emma squeezed Daniel's hand tighter. She was old enough to understand what drowning meant. Except someone did come, Walter continued. He looked at Daniel with an expression that made Daniel's throat tighten. A farmer in a beat-up Ford pickup, covered in mud, who drove past the barricades and waded into water up to his chest. He had a rope. He tied it to his truck and to himself, and he went in after them. The diner was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Someone had turned off the griddle. He got the door open, Walter said. He pulled Sophie out first, handed her to my daughter through the window. Then he helped Rebecca climb out. By the time they reached the bank, the truck was completely submerged. Another 30 seconds and they'd have been gone. Daniel remembered the weight of the child in his arms, how light she'd been, how her screams had turned to whimpers against his chest. He remembered the mother's eyes, wild with terror and gratitude. He remembered driving away, because he'd had to get home. His own kids had been with a neighbor, and he'd already been gone too long. I tried to find him afterward, Walter said. Asked everyone. Nobody knew who he was. The police report just said unidentified civilian, but I never forgot his face. He turned back to Daniel. And when you walked in here today, I recognized you immediately. Luke peeked out from behind Daniel's leg, his small face serious. My daddy's a hero? Walter knelt down with some effort, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Your daddy is the bravest man I've ever met, and he never asked for anything in return. That's when Daniel finally found his voice. I did what anyone would have done. But you're not just anyone. Walter stood, addressing the room again. I made some calls while you were ordering. Do you know who Daniel Hayes is? He looked around at the ranchers, the couple, the waitress frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. He's the farmer who's been giving away his grain. The curiosity hook hit like a fish hook in the gut. Daniel's stomach dropped. No, not here. Not now. Sally's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Walter pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, the kind businessmen carried, bound in leather. I've been in Texas for 3 weeks, finalizing some property acquisitions. Word travels when you ask the right questions. Daniel Hayes owns 140 acres north of town. Wheat and corn, mostly. The drought has devastated him, but he still manages to produce enough to keep himself afloat. He paused, letting the tension build. Except he doesn't keep it. For the past 2 years, bags of grain have been appearing on doorsteps all over Brazos County. Anonymous donations, always at night, always to families in trouble. The rancher at the counter, a man named Bill Hodges with a gray handlebar mustache, suddenly looked uncomfortable. Wait, are you saying... I'm saying that half the people in this town have survived because of Daniel Hayes. Walter's voice hardened. And you've all let him starve while you whispered about his failures. The words landed like a slap. Silence can be loud. Sally's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. That's not... I didn't know. You didn't ask, Walter said simply. None of you did. You saw a man struggling and assumed he was weak. You saw his children in hand-me-downs and decided they weren't good enough for your diner. His gaze swept the room, and grown men looked away. Shame on you. All of you. Emma tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Daddy, is that true? Do you give away our food? Daniel knelt beside his daughter, his eyes level with hers. This wasn't how he'd wanted them to find out. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to go. Sometimes people need help more than we do, sweetheart. That's all. But we're hungry sometimes too, Emma whispered, and the simplicity of her truth cut deeper than any accusation. Daniel had no answer for that. What could he say? That he lay awake calculating which families were worse off? That he'd rather his children go without dessert than let the Morrison twins, whose father had died in a tractor accident, go without dinner? That every bag of grain he left in the dark felt like both a gift and a theft from his own kids. Walter placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You've been a guardian angel to people who didn't even know your name. But as the diner began to shift, as faces that had been turned away suddenly looked at Daniel with something like recognition, as Sally stammered excuses that nobody wanted to hear, Daniel felt a cold dread settle in his chest. Because kindness, he'd learned, didn't always inspire gratitude. Sometimes it inspired something much more dangerous, and the person who'd just discovered his secret was about to make a decision that would expose everything he'd tried to keep hidden, including the one truth that could destroy him completely. Sally Brennan's hands began to shake, and she gripped the counter edge so hard her knuckles turned white. The woman who'd just humiliated Daniel Hayes was about to discover she owed him everything she had. Bill Hodges stood up from his counter stool, his weathered face creased with something between confusion and dawning horror. Daniel, those bags of grain that showed up at my place last winter after my barn burned, that was you. Daniel said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. And the Johnsons, Bill continued, his voice growing louder. And the Martinez family. And Christ, Daniel. We all thought it was the church doing food drives. We thought... He stopped, unable to finish. The young couple in the back booth looked at each other. The woman, mid-20s with dark hair pulled into a ponytail, stood abruptly. Mr. Hayes? I'm Jenny Reeves. You don't know me, but last March, someone left 3 bags of cornmeal on our porch. We'd just had a baby, and my husband had lost his job at the mill. That food kept us going for 6 weeks. Tears streamed down her face. That was you? Daniel's jaw clenched. This was exactly what he'd tried to avoid. The exposure, the questions, the weight of people's gratitude when he didn't deserve it, when his own kids ate watered-down soup while strangers had full bellies. How? Sally's voice cracked the word in half. She'd moved out from behind the counter, her polyester uniform rustling, her face stripped of its earlier cruelty. Now she just looked lost. How could you afford to give anything away? Everyone knows you're barely surviving. Walter Pritchard smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. That's the question, isn't it? I wondered the same thing, so I did some research. He pulled out another paper from his jacket. This one looked official, typewritten with columns of numbers. Daniel Hayes took out 3 loans over the past 2 years. 1 from Brazos County Bank, 2 from private lenders at interest rates that should be illegal. Total debt, $47,000. Emma gasped. Even at 7, she understood that number was impossibly big. He didn't use that money for his farm, Walter continued. He used it to buy grain wholesale from suppliers in Oklahoma and Arkansas. Then he distributed it, anonymously, at a loss. The old man's voice carried an edge of disbelief. Daniel Hayes bankrupted himself to feed a town that didn't even know his name. The air in the diner felt thick, hard to breathe. Sally stumbled backward until she hit a booth, then sat down heavily. Her face had gone gray. No, that's not... She looked up at Daniel with wild eyes. Last April, during the worst of the drought, someone left 17 bags of flour at my back door. Industrial-sized bags. I thought it was from my supplier, some kind of mistake or charity. I used that flour for 6 weeks. It kept this diner running when I couldn't afford to restock. The recognition crashed over her like cold water. "That was you," she whispered. "You saved my business. And I just—" Her voice broke. "I just threw you out." Daniel finally spoke, and his voice was tired. "You needed it more than I did." "More than you did?" Sally's laugh was harsh with self-loathing. "You were starving your own children to feed me? To feed all of us?" She gestured wildly at the diner. "What kind of man does that?" "A good one," Walter said quietly. "The kind we don't deserve." Luke tugged on his father's hand. "Daddy, why is everyone crying?" Daniel picked up his son, settling him on his hip. The boy's toy tractor pressed between them, a small wooden anchor in a moment that felt like drowning. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused, buddy. That's all." But Emma understood more. She looked around at the faces in the diner, the ranchers who'd turned away, the couple who'd stayed silent, the waitress who'd watched it happen. "You were all mean to us," she said, her voice clear and accusing. "All of you. And my daddy helped you anyway." The truth from a child's mouth cuts deepest. Bill Hodges removed his Stetson, holding it against his chest, like he was at a funeral. "Daniel, I don't know what to say. Last year when my wife got sick, when we couldn't afford her medicine, we found cash in our mailbox. $300 in 20s, wrapped in newspaper. That was you too, wasn't it?" Daniel looked at the floor. "Your wife needed her medicine." "We don't have $300, Emma said suddenly, her child's logic cutting through to the heart of it. "We don't have anything. Daddy counts pennies for milk." The room fell silent again, but this silence felt different. Heavier, suffocating with shame. Sally stood on shaking legs and walked to Daniel. Up close, he could see that her makeup was running, dark streaks of mascara cutting through the powder. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear to God, I didn't know." "Would it have mattered if you did?" Daniel asked. The question wasn't cruel, just honest. Sally flinched like he'd struck her. "I want to say yes. I want to believe I'm better than what I showed you today." She looked at Emma and Luke, really looked at them, maybe for the first time. "I'm so sorry. Both of you? You deserved better than what I gave you." Emma's hand tightened around Daniel's. Apologies don't fix hungry. 7 years old, and she'd learned that lesson too well. Walter stepped forward, his expensive shoes clicking on the linoleum. "Here's what's going to happen now. Daniel, my family owes you a debt we can never repay. My daughter is alive because of you. My granddaughter, Sophie's 10 now, brilliant, beautiful. She exists because you didn't drive past that flood." "I didn't do it for payment," Daniel said. "I know. That's exactly why you're getting it anyway." Walter reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "I'm writing you a check for $50,000. It'll cover your debts and give you enough to get back on your feet." Daniel shook his head immediately. "No, I can't accept that." "You can, and you will." Walter's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Consider it payment for services rendered. 3 years of feeding an ungrateful town, plus saving 2 lives. If anything, I'm lowballing you." The diner watched this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, their heads swiveling back and forth. "Please," Daniel said, and there was desperation in his voice now. "I don't want your money. I just want to take my kids home." Walter studied him for a long moment, his sharp eyes seeing something others missed. "You're afraid," he said softly. "You're afraid that accepting help makes you weak, that it makes you like everyone else who's taken from you." He smiled sadly. Daniel, there's a difference between charity and payment. You've earned this. Let someone help you for once. But before Daniel could respond, before he could accept or refuse or run, the diner door swung open with a bang that made everyone jump. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the late afternoon sun, his silhouette dark and threatening. "Well, well," the man said, his voice carrying the smooth menace of a snake's hiss. "Looks like I found you, Hayes." Daniel's face went white. Emma and Luke pressed closer to their father. Sally whispered, "Oh God, that's Marcus Sutherland." And every person in that diner who knew the name suddenly understood that Daniel's secret generosity had come with a price tag far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Marcus Sutherland wore cruelty like cologne, and the smell of it filled Sally's diner the moment he stepped inside. Daniel's generosity had attracted a predator, and now his children would pay the price. Marcus was 40-something, lean and tall, with slicked back hair the color of motor oil and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wore a tan suit that looked expensive but somehow wrong. Too shiny, too tight, like a costume rather than clothing. A silver ring on his right hand caught the light, thick and heavy enough to do damage. The leather of his boots creaked as he walked, and he smelled like aftershave and cigarette smoke, and something underneath that reminded Daniel of spoiled meat. "Didn't expect to find you in town, Hayes," Marcus said, his voice smooth as honey and twice as sticky. "You've been avoiding my calls. That's not very neighborly." Daniel shifted Emma and Luke behind him with one arm, his body becoming a shield. "I told you I'd have the payment by the end of the month." End of the month was 3 days ago. Marcus's smile widened. "Which means we're into penalty territory now. You read the contract, didn't you? Late fees compound daily, at 15%. Walter's eyes narrowed. 15% daily? That's usury. That's illegal." Marcus turned his attention to the old man, assessing him with the casual interest of a snake evaluating whether something was food or threat. "And you are?" "Walter Pritchard. And if you're one of the lenders who gave Daniel Hayes a loan at predatory rates, you and I are going to have a very unpleasant conversation." Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Recognition, maybe calculation. Everyone in Texas oil country knew the Pritchard name. Money like that commanded respect, even from men like Marcus Sutherland. But Marcus recovered quickly, his smile returning. "Mr. Pritchard, what an honor. But this is private business between me and Hayes here. Contract was signed voluntarily. All legal, all proper." "Show me the contract," Walter demanded. "Don't have it on me, but I'm happy to let my lawyers discuss it with yours." Marcus turned back to Daniel. "In the meantime, I'm here to collect what's owed. $15,000, including late fees. Cash." The number hit the room like a physical blow. $15,000, Sally's voice cracked. "Daniel, how much did you originally borrow from him?" Daniel's jaw worked silently for a moment. 5,000, 18 months ago." "Jesus Christ," Bill Hodges muttered. "That's extortion." Marcus shrugged, unbothered by the accusation. "It's business. High-risk loan, high interest." Hayes knew what he was signing. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and waved it lazily. "Got his signature right here. And since he can't pay in cash, well..." His eyes drifted to the window, where Daniel's Ford pickup sat in the parking lot. "I'll be taking collateral. Truck, farm equipment, whatever adds up to 15,000. Emma's small voice cut through the tension. "You can't take our truck. That's how we get to school." Marcus looked down at her, and his smile turned almost pitying. "Sorry, sweetheart, but your daddy made some bad choices. Actions have consequences. Don't talk to my daughter, Daniel said quietly. But there was steel underneath the words. The diner had transformed from a place of shame to something else, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The ranchers at the counter had stood up. Jenny Reeves's husband, a large man, with mechanic's grease still under his fingernails, had moved closer. Even the waitress had picked up the phone, her finger hovering over the buttons. Sally Brennan stepped forward, and her voice was shaking but clear. You're not taking anything from this man. Not in my establishment. Marcus laughed, genuinely amused. Oh, Sally. Always so dramatic. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us, Bill Hodges said, moving to stand beside Daniel. Daniel Hayes fed this town when we were starving. He gave away everything he had. And you... He pointed at Marcus with a scarred, calloused finger. You took advantage of a good man's desperation. I provided a service, Marcus countered smoothly. Nobody forced Hayes to take my money. He came to me because the banks turned him down. I took a risk on him. You preyed on him, Walter said coldly. There's a difference. Marcus's smile finally faded. Careful, old man. Pritchard name or not, you're interfering with legal business. That can get messy. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Luke started crying. Not loud, just small hiccuping sobs against Daniel's shoulder. The sound seemed to crack something in the room's tension. Daniel took a breath and made a decision. Fine. Take the truck. Take whatever you need. Just leave my children alone. No, Walter said immediately. Daniel, don't. It's done, Daniel interrupted. His voice was flat, defeated. I signed the contract. I owe the debt. Let him take it. Marcus's smile returned, triumphant. Now that's sensible. I'll have a tow truck here in 20 minutes. Keys. Daniel reached into his pocket, his hand shaking slightly. Emma grabbed his arm, her small fingers digging in. Daddy, no, how will we get home? How will we? The diner door opened again. A woman in her 30s entered, breathless, her face flushed like she'd been running. She wore jeans and a University of Texas t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Behind her, a little girl with pigtails, maybe 10 years old, peered into the diner with wide eyes. Mom, is that him? The girl asked. The woman's eyes scanned the room and locked onto Daniel. Her expression transformed. Recognition, disbelief, overwhelming emotion. That's him, she whispered. That's the man who saved us. Walter turned, and his face lit up with joy and surprise. Rebecca? Sophie? What are you doing here? You called, Rebecca said, still staring at Daniel. You said you'd found him. We drove straight from Houston. She walked forward slowly, like she was approaching something sacred. Mr. Hayes? Do you remember me? Daniel looked at her, really looked, and the memory clicked into place. The terrified woman in the truck, the child's screams, the weight of both of them as he'd pulled them from the water. The flood, he said quietly. Sophie, the 3-year-old who was now 10, stepped forward. She held something in her hands, a drawing protected by clear plastic. I made this for you. Mom said if we ever found you, I should give it to you. She handed it to Daniel. It was a child's drawing, obviously years old. A stick figure man with a blue shirt standing in blue water, holding a smaller stick figure. Above it, in crayon, were the words, "Thank you for saving me." Daniel's hands trembled as he took it. Marcus Sutherland watched this exchange with calculating eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried a new edge. How touching. But this doesn't change anything. Contracts still valid. Debts still owed. Rebecca turned to face him, and her expression hardened. How much does he owe you? 15,000. I'll pay it, Rebecca said immediately. Right now. Cash, check, wire transfer, whatever you want. Marcus's smile flickered. That's exactly how this works, Walter interrupted, pulling out his checkbook. You want money? We'll give you money. 15,000 to clear Daniel's debt right now. But Marcus was shaking his head, and something in his expression had shifted. Something uglier. See, that's where you're wrong. The contract specifies that if Hayes defaults, I get to claim assets. Not money. Assets. And I've already got buyers lined up for that farm equipment. His eyes glittered. I'll make a lot more than 15,000 selling it piece by piece. The truth landed like a bomb. This was never about the money. This was about destroying Daniel Hayes completely. And as Marcus reached for the keys in Daniel's hand, the diner erupted into motion, but not fast enough to stop what happened next. Daniel's fingers closed around the keys just as Marcus's hand reached for them, and time seemed to slow. What Marcus Sutherland wanted wasn't payment. It was revenge for something Daniel didn't even remember doing. Bill Hodges moved fast for a man in his 60s, stepping between Marcus and Daniel with his substantial frame. You're not touching those keys. You're not touching anything that belongs to this family. Marcus didn't back down. Instead, he reached into his jacket, and every person in that diner tensed. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was another document, this one thicker, bound with a blue cover. Foreclosure notice, Marcus said, his voice almost cheerful. Filed with the county clerk's office 3 weeks ago. Daniel Hayes missed his bank payments. That means the farm itself goes into receivership in 48 hours, unless the full outstanding balance is paid. That's not 15,000. That's 47,000. Walter's face darkened. You can't foreclose on a property you don't hold the primary mortgage on? I don't, Marcus agreed. But I know the people who do, and they're very motivated to sell. In fact, he checked his watch, a gold Rolex that looked stolen. They're finalizing the sale right now. To me, for pennies on the dollar. The trap revealed itself in terrible clarity. Daniel felt his knees weaken. The farm, the land that had been in his family for 3 generations. The fields where his father had taught him to drive a tractor. The porch where his wife had sat in her rocking chair, nursing their babies in the early morning light. The place where Emma and Luke had taken their first steps. Why? The word came out broken. Why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you? Marcus's smile finally reached his eyes, but there was no warmth in it, only cold satisfaction. You really don't remember me, do you, Hayes? Daniel stared at the man, searching his face for something familiar. Nothing clicked. June 1977, Marcus said. County Fair. You were there with your wife, both of you young and happy. I was there too, working security. Remember the fire? The memory hit Daniel like a fist to the stomach. The fire. Someone's cigarette had caught in the hay near the livestock pens. Flames had spread fast, and the animals, horses mostly, had been trapped, screaming. He'd run toward the smoke while everyone else ran away. He'd opened the gates, released 6 horses, gotten them out. But there'd been a 7th horse. A beautiful chestnut quarter horse that belonged to your horse, Daniel whispered. My horse, Marcus confirmed. Champion Dreamer. Worth $30,000. Trained for barrel racing. My ticket out of this dead-end county. And you... his voice sharpened with old rage. "You saved 6 horses and left mine to burn." "I tried," Daniel said, the memory coming back in painful detail. "The stall was already engulfed. I couldn't reach it. I tried. Not hard enough." Marcus's composure cracked, showing the raw wound underneath. "I watched you pull other people's animals to safety. I watched you risk your life for their livestock. But when you got to mine, you just stopped. You looked at the flames and decided it wasn't worth it." "It wasn't a decision," Daniel protested. "The roof was collapsing. I would have died. Better you than my horse." The words were cold, final. "That animal was everything to me, my investment, my future, and you let it die." Sally Brennan's voice cut through, quiet but clear. "Marcus, that fire was ruled an accident. Daniel saved 6 animals. He was a hero." "He was selective," Marcus spat. "And I've spent 7 years rebuilding what I lost. 7 years of taking risks, making hard loans, building capital. And you know what? When Daniel Hayes's name crossed my desk 18 months ago, when he came begging for money to buy grain, I saw an opportunity." His smile returned, not just for profit, for justice. The word twisted in the air, perverse. Emma's small voice broke the silence. "You're a bad man." Marcus looked down at her, and something in his expression made Daniel's blood run cold. "I'm a businessman, little girl. Your daddy made choices. Now he pays." Sophie, Walter's granddaughter, the child Daniel had saved from the flood, stepped forward, her drawing still clutched in Daniel's hand. "Mr. Sutherland, my mom says that when someone saves your life, you owe them everything. That man," she pointed at Daniel, "he jumped into a flood for me. He could have died. How much is that worth?" The question hung there, simple and devastating. Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's different." "How?" Sophie pressed. "You're angry because your horse died and he couldn't save it. But he saved 6 others. He saved me. He saved my mom. He's been saving this whole town." Her voice grew stronger. "If you're mad at him for not dying to save your horse, then you're just mean." Out of the mouths of babes. The ranchers at the counter murmured agreement. Jenny Reeves was crying openly. Even the waitress had set down her coffee pot and was staring at Marcus with undisguised disgust. Walter Pritchard stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority. "Marcus Sutherland, I'm going to make you an offer. I'll buy Daniel's debt, all of it, for double what you paid. $94,000. Clean sale, immediate transfer. You walk away with a significant profit, and Daniel keeps his farm." Marcus considered this, his fingers drumming against his thigh. For a moment, Daniel felt hope kindle in his chest. Then Marcus shook his head. "No deal." "Name your price," Walter said. "There is no price." Marcus's voice was flat. "I want him to lose everything. I want him to know what it feels like to watch something you love burn to ash, while someone who could have saved it just stands there." The cruelty of it stole the air from the room. Daniel sank into the nearest booth, Emma and Luke climbing up beside him. He pulled them close, and they felt so small against him, so fragile. "I'm sorry," he whispered to them. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, Daddy," Emma said, but her voice shook. Sally Brennan had been standing behind the counter, silent, her face working through a series of emotions. Now she moved, walking slowly toward Marcus, and when she spoke, her voice was different, harder, older, carrying a weight Daniel hadn't heard before. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." He barely glanced at her. "Not now, Sally." Yes, now. She positioned herself directly in front of him, and everyone in the diner turned to watch. That fire at the county fair, the one that killed your horse. I know who started it. The diner went dead silent. Marcus's eyes locked onto her. What are you talking about? Sally's hands were shaking again, but she didn't back down. I was 19, working the cotton candy stand. I was smoking behind the livestock pens, even though it was against the rules. I thought I'd put the cigarette out, but... Her voice cracked. I didn't. The hay caught. I ran. I never told anyone. The confession exploded through the room like a grenade. Marcus stared at her, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally, terrible understanding. You killed my horse? It was an accident, Sally whispered. But yes, it was me and Daniel Hayes, the man you've been destroying. He spent 7 years of his life paying for my mistake. Marcus Sutherland's face drained of color, then flooded red with rage, and the transformation was terrifying to watch. Sally Brennan had just shattered 7 years of misdirected vengeance, and the fallout was about to destroy everyone in its path. You? The word came out strangled. Marcus took a step toward Sally, his hands clenching into fists. You let me blame him? All this time you watched me target Daniel Hayes, and you said nothing? Sally stood her ground, though tears streamed down her face, cutting through her makeup like rain on paint. I was scared. I was 19 years old and terrified I'd go to jail. By the time I realized what you were doing to Daniel, I'd kept the secret so long that telling the truth felt impossible. Felt impossible? Marcus's voice rose to a shout. You let an innocent man pay for 7 years. You watched him lose everything. I know, Sally sobbed. I know what I did. I've lived with it every single day. Every time Daniel came into this diner, every time I saw his children. She looked at Emma and Luke, her face crumpling. I've been living in hell of my own making. Bill Hodges moved between them, his voice calm but firm. Marcus, take a breath. Think about what you're doing here. But Marcus wasn't listening. He rounded on Daniel, who still sat in the booth with his arms around his children. Did you know? Did she tell you? No, Daniel said quietly. I never knew who started the fire. I just knew it wasn't my fault. But you let me. Marcus's voice broke. I destroyed you. I took everything. And you just let me. What was I supposed to do? Daniel's voice carried exhaustion and something else. Pity. You wanted someone to blame. You needed it. Would the truth have made your horse any less dead? The question hit like a slap. Marcus staggered back, his hand reaching for the counter to steady himself. The weight of 7 years. 7 years of hate, of planning, of carefully orchestrated revenge, came crashing down on him all at once. I can't. He looked around the diner, at the faces watching him with mixtures of anger, pity, and disgust. This can't be. Walter Pritchard's voice cut through Marcus's spiral. It is, and now you have a choice to make. You can continue down this path, destroying an innocent man over a lie, or you can make it right. Make it right? Marcus laughed, a broken sound. How do I make this right? I've taken everything from him. He looked at the foreclosure documents in his hand, at the keys Daniel had almost handed over. Oh God, what have I done? Sally reached toward him, her hand trembling. Marcus, please. I'll make a full confession. I'll go to the authorities. I'll take responsibility for the fire. But don't punish Daniel anymore. He's suffered enough for both of us. Suffered enough? Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. He fed this entire town while going bankrupt. He saved children from a flood. The words seemed to choke him. He's a better man than I'll ever be. Rebecca, Walter's daughter, stepped forward, Sophie still holding her hand. Mr. Sutherland, I don't know you, but I know what Daniel Hayes did for me and my daughter. He risked his life without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. That's not just heroism. That's grace. She paused, letting her words sink in. You have a chance right now to show grace too. Don't waste it. The diner held its collective breath. Marcus looked down at the foreclosure papers, at the contracts, at all the legal mechanisms he'd put in place to destroy Daniel Hayes. His hands shook as he slowly, deliberately, began tearing them up. The sound of ripping paper was the loudest thing in the room. I can't undo what I've done, Marcus said, his voice hollow. The bank sale is already finalized. The foreclosure process is already in motion, even if I wanted to stop it. He shook his head. It's too late. No. Walter's voice was steel. It's never too late. I'll buy the farm from whoever purchased it. I'll pay triple the value if I have to. Daniel Hayes will not lose his home. Not while I'm alive to prevent it. Marcus met Walter's eyes, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or a challenge. The buyer is Consolidated Agricultural Holdings. They're a development company. They want to turn the property into a corporate cattle operation. I know them, Walter said grimly. They're my competitors. This just became personal. He pulled out his phone. Give me 20 minutes. As Walter stepped outside to make his calls, the diner remained frozen in this strange tableau. A debt collector destroyed by truth, a diner owner drowning in guilt, a farmer sitting with his children and wondering if hope was real or just another cruel illusion. Luke tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Daddy, are we going to be okay? Daniel didn't have an answer. He'd learned the hard way that promises could break as easily as hearts. But Emma, 7 years old, wiser than she should be, looked at Marcus Sutherland with her clear, unforgiving gaze. You should say sorry? The simplicity of it cut through everything else. Marcus sank into a chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous. He buried his face in his hands. I don't even know where to start. Start with the truth, Sally said softly. That's what I should have done 7 years ago. The truth. Marcus looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I loved that horse more than I loved most people. When it died, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I needed someone to blame because if it was just an accident, if it was just bad luck, then it meant the universe was cruel and random and nothing mattered. He looked at Daniel. So I made you the villain. I gave my pain a target, and I convinced myself it was justice. It wasn't justice, Daniel said quietly. It was just more pain. I know that now. Marcus's voice cracked. But knowing doesn't fix what I broke. Sally pulled out a chair and sat beside Marcus, two broken people sitting in the wreckage of their choices. Then we fix it together, she said. Whatever it takes. However long it takes. Bill Hodges cleared his throat. Speaking of fixing things, he looked around at the other ranchers at the counter, at Jenny Reeves and her husband, at the waitress still standing with the phone in her hand. Daniel Hayes has been helping this town for 2 years. Seems to me it's past time the town helped him back. What are you proposing? Asked Jenny's husband. A fund, Bill said simply. We pool our resources. Everyone who Daniel helped, everyone who took his grain, his money, his kindness, we pay it forward. We clear his debts. We help him rebuild. I don't have much, Jenny said immediately. "But what I have, I'll give." "Same here," said one of the other ranchers. "Count me in," said the waitress. Around the diner, voices began to echo agreement. Small amounts, probably. $5 here, 20 there. But it was something. It was community. It was what Daniel had given them, reflected back. Sally stood up, wiping her eyes. "This diner made $10,000 last quarter. I'm donating it. All of it. It's the least I can do." Marcus looked at her, then at Daniel, then at the faces around the room. "I put $47,000 into buying his debt. I'll return it. Every penny. And He swallowed hard. "I'll cover the legal fees to clear the foreclosure. Whatever it costs." Emma's small voice cut through the offers. "Is that enough?" Everyone turned to look at her. "Is it enough to save our home?" She looked up at her father with eyes too old for 7. "Or are we still going to lose everything?" The door opened, and Walter stepped back inside. His expression was unreadable. The entire diner turned toward him, and in that moment, suspended between hope and despair, Daniel Hayes understood that his family's entire future hung on whatever words came next. Walter Pritchard's face remained unreadable for 3 excruciating seconds, and in that silence, Daniel felt every hope and fear of his entire life crystallize into a single moment. The farm's fate and his children's future balanced on the edge of whatever words came next. Walter closed the diner door behind him and walked slowly to the center of the room. His expensive shoes clicked against the linoleum, each step measured and deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost casual. Consolidated Agricultural Holdings is owned by a subsidiary of Pritchard Energy Corporation. The words took a moment to land. Marcus's eyes widened. "You own the company that bought his farm?" "My son runs it, technically. But yes." Walter allowed himself a small smile. "I called him, explained the situation. He's transferring the deed back to Daniel Hayes for the original mortgage. Price: $22,000. Not the foreclosure sale price. The fair price." Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. 22,000 was still impossible, but it wasn't 47,000. It wasn't total destruction. Walter continued, his voice growing stronger. "Marcus has agreed to cover that amount. Sally's donation covers the remaining private debts. The community fund." He gestured to the people gathered in the diner. "We'll cover the operational costs to get the farm running again. Seeds, equipment repair, whatever's needed." "I don't understand," Daniel managed. "Why would your son agree to sell it back? He could make millions developing it." "Because I told him what you did for Rebecca and Sophie. I told him about the flood." Walter's voice roughened with emotion. "I told him that some debts can never be repaid with money, only with honor." Emma's hand squeezed Daniel's so tight it hurt. "Daddy, does that mean we get to stay home?" Daniel pulled both his children close, his vision blurring with tears he'd been holding back for 2 years. "Yeah, sweetheart. We get to stay home." The diner erupted, not with cheers. That would have been too simple, too clean. Instead, people moved. Bill Hodges clasped Daniel's shoulder, his weathered hand gripping tight. Jenny Reeves crossed the room and hugged Emma and Luke, crying openly. The other ranchers formed a line, each one offering handshakes, promises of help, apologies for their silence. Marcus Sutherland stood apart from the celebration, watching it unfold with an expression that might have been grief or relief or both. Sally Brennan approached him slowly, cautiously, like approaching a wounded animal. I'm going to the sheriff tomorrow, she said. I'm telling them everything about the fire. Whatever consequences come, I'll face them. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The statute of limitations on accidental property damage is 5 years. Legally, you're clear. I don't care about legally, Sally said. I care about doing what's right. Finally. Then I'm going with you, Marcus said. I won't let you face it alone. You made a mistake. He looked at Daniel, who was kneeling beside his children, both kids talking excitedly about going home. I made a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to destroy someone. That's worse. Sally reached out and took his hand. Then we both do better. Starting now. Sophie, the 10-year-old who'd started this chain of revelations, walked over to Marcus. She held up her crayon drawing, the one she'd made for Daniel. Mr. Sutherland, you should make something for Mr. Hayes too, like an apology drawing. The absurdity of it, a child's solution to an adult catastrophe, made Marcus laugh, a broken sound that turned into something that might have been a sob. I don't think a drawing is going to cut it, kid. Then what will? Sophie asked with a child's directness. Marcus knelt down to her level, this man who'd spent 7 years plotting revenge, now face to face with the innocence he'd forgotten existed. I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe some things you break can't be fixed. My mom says everything can be fixed if you really want to fix it, Sophie said. Even really broken things. You just have to want it bad enough. Rebecca joined them, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Sophie's right. But Mr. Sutherland, fixing something doesn't mean it goes back to how it was before. It means you make something new, something different, maybe better. Walter watched this exchange with a thoughtful expression, then addressed the entire diner. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, I'm wiring the funds to clear Daniel's debts. But that's not the end. That's the beginning. He turned to Daniel. You're going to need help getting the farm operational again. Equipment, labor, expertise. I'm arranging all of it. Walter, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Consider it an investment. Walter's smile was genuine now. In fact, I'd like to propose something. A partnership. You keep running the farm, but I provide capital and resources. Profits split 60-40 in your favor. You maintain ownership, control, everything. I just want to ensure you never face this situation again. Daniel stared at him. Why would you do that? Because 3 years ago you saved my family without asking what you'd get in return. That's the kind of character I want to invest in. Walter extended his hand. What do you say? Daniel looked at that offered hand, then at his children, then at the faces around the diner. People who'd ignored his struggle, who'd taken his kindness without seeing it, who were now offering their own flawed attempts at redemption. He took Walter's hand. I say yes. Thank you. Bill Hodges raised his coffee cup. To Daniel Hayes, the best man in Brazos County. To Daniel, the diner echoed, but Emma tugged on her father's sleeve, her young face serious. Daddy, can we eat now? I'm really hungry. The laughter that followed was real, warm, breaking the last of the tension. Sally Brennan wiped her eyes and moved behind the counter. Dinner's on the house, for the Hayes family and anyone else who wants to stay. We're celebrating. As the diner transformed from a place of confrontation to something like a feast, Daniel found himself sitting in that red vinyl booth with his children, watching his community, flawed, failing, but trying, gather around him. Marcus Sutherland sat alone in the corner, staring at his hands. After a moment, Daniel stood and walked over. He didn't say anything, just placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus looked up, his face raw. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Probably not," Daniel agreed. "But I'm giving it anyway. Because holding on to hate just means both of us stay broken." "How do I live with what I've done?" "Same way I lived with losing everything. One day at a time, one choice at a time." Daniel paused. "And by remembering that tomorrow's a chance to be better than today." As night fell over Brazos County, Sally's diner glowed warm against the darkness. Inside, people ate and talked and laughed. Emma and Luke fell asleep in the booth, their bellies full for the first time in weeks. And Daniel Hayes, farmer, hero, keeper of secrets, guardian of a town that had failed him, finally allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, kindness didn't always lead to ruin. Sometimes it led home. 6 months later, Daniel Hayes stood in his wheat field at sunrise, watching golden stalks bend in the October wind, and understood that salvation never looks the way you expect it to. The story of what happened at Sally's diner that August afternoon had changed more than one man's fate. It had rewritten what an entire community believed about itself. The farm had come back to life slowly, like a patient recovering from a long illness. Walter Pritchard's investment had provided new equipment, quality seeds, and enough capital to hire seasonal workers. The fields that had been dust and despair in August were now heavy with harvest. The numbers looked good, better than good. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel would end the season with a profit. But the real change wasn't in the ledgers. It was in the way people looked at him now. Not with pity or shame, but with something harder to quantify. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Every Sunday, families from town brought covered dishes to the farm. They called it a community dinner, but Daniel knew what it really was. Restitution, paid in casseroles and pie. Emma and Luke had new clothes now. Store-bought, not hand-me-downs. They had full lunch boxes and winter coats that actually fit. But more than that, they had their father back. Not the exhausted, desperate man who'd counted pennies and skipped meals, but someone who smiled again, who sang while making breakfast, who tucked them in at night without that haunted look in his eyes. Sally's diner had become something of a pilgrimage site. The booth where it had all happened now had a small brass plaque that read, "In this place, a community learned the difference between charity and justice." Sally had installed it herself, against Daniel's protests. She'd also renamed the Thursday special the Hayes Plate. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans, with all proceeds going to a new community fund she'd established for families in crisis. Sally herself had changed. She'd gone to Sheriff Morgan the day after the confrontation, confessed to starting the fire 7 years ago, and offered to accept whatever consequences came. The sheriff, after consulting with the county attorney, had filed it as a closed case. Too old for prosecution, marked as accidental with disclosure. But Sally wore the confession like armor now, no longer hiding behind makeup and sharp words. She'd even started attending the Methodist church on Sundays, sitting in the back pew where Daniel's family sat. Marcus Sutherland had left Brazos County 3 days after that August afternoon. No forwarding address, no goodbye. But a month later, an envelope had arrived at the farm, addressed to Daniel in careful handwriting. Inside was a check for $10,000. "For the families I hurt while hurting you." And a single sentence: "I'm learning to live with ghosts." Daniel had used the money to establish a scholarship fund at the county high school for students from farming families. He'd named it the Champion Dreamer Scholarship, after Marcus's horse. It seemed right somehow, turning that old pain into something that could help rather than harm. Walter Pritchard visited the farm once a month, always bringing Sophie along. The girl had attached herself to Emma and Luke, and the three of them would run through the fields while the adults discussed crop yields and market prices. Rebecca had started bringing her husband too, and sometimes they'd stay for dinner. All of them crowded around Daniel's old kitchen table, laughing and telling stories until the stars came out. On this particular October morning, Daniel watched his children emerge from the farmhouse, their faces bright with sleep and excitement. Today was harvest day, the first full harvest in 3 years, and half the county was coming to help. "Daddy!" Luke called, running toward him through the wheat. "Miss Sally's here, and Mr. Bill, and there's like 100 people." It wasn't quite 100, but it was close. Trucks lined the long driveway, and families poured into the fields with baskets and gloves. Jenny Reeves brought lemonade. Bill Hodges brought his grandson and 3 extra pairs of work gloves. Even Sheriff Morgan showed up, rolling up his sleeves and joking that he hadn't done honest work in years. By noon, the harvest was halfway done. By sunset, the silos were full. They gathered afterward in the farmhouse yard, exhausted and dirty and happy. Someone had brought a guitar. Someone else had brought beer and soda. Children chased fireflies while adults sat in lawn chairs and watched the sky turn purple and gold. Emma climbed onto Daniel's lap, her small hands dirty from the day's work. "Daddy, are we rich now?" Daniel thought about the question, about the money in the bank and the full silos and the partnership with Walter Pritchard, but also about the people scattered across his yard, about Sally bringing them dinner twice a week, about Marcus's letter sitting in his desk drawer, about the way this community had finally learned to see him. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, holding her close. "I think we are." As darkness settled over the farm, Daniel looked up at the stars and thought about his wife. Gone 7 years now. He hoped she could see this, hoped she knew their children were safe, fed, loved by an entire town that had finally remembered what it meant to be neighbors. The next morning, Daniel would find another envelope in his mailbox. No return address, no signature, just a newspaper clipping about a donation made to a children's hospital in Houston, and a note in Marcus Sutherland's handwriting. Still learning. Some people say that on quiet nights in Brazos County, you can still hear the echo of a community learning what it means to be saved by the very person they'd failed to see. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stories like Daniel's remind us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear flannel shirts and count pennies and give away their last bag of grain. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that kindness always finds its way home. And let me know in the comments, have you ever witnessed an act of quiet heroism that changed everything? I'll see you in the next story.